Leading us off, the gentleman to my right, is J. Eric Smith. From 1922 to 1939, James Joyce, Work in Progress, leaked to the public in 47 separate editions, appearing in literary journals, private and limited edition publications, and rare unreleased items pressed to secure copyrights. J. Eric Smith's presentation will trace the evolution of one of the 20th century's most inscrutable masterpieces, touching on the art of both Joyce's works and the books pressed to share them. Please welcome J. Eric.
All right, I'm going to hold the stick if that's okay. So if everybody can hear me okay in the back, that good? All right. I'm going to talk tonight about books as works of art. So people talk about books as works of art, and typically when they say that, they're speaking about books in terms of intellectual forms of art. But books can actually be physical works of art. This is a photo of a collection called the Limited Editions Club. This is a series that ran from the 1920s to the 1950s, where great writers like James Joyce were paired with great designers, great artists, to create books as works of art. This is a portrait of an artist. Joyce obviously wrote the Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, one of his famous books. He's kind of an older man here, but this is one of the most distinctive and well-known photos of Joyce. And I'm going to use his work to talk about this place where books as works of art, intellectual and physical overlap. This is the very first publication by James Joyce. It was published in 1901. He had actually submitted this for publication to the University College at Dublin. They declined to publish it, so he paid to self-publish this essay. In 1904, he met Nora Barnacle on June 16, 1904, which is a very important date in his history. Nora was his muse. She literally became his muse, and for the next 18 years, he spent most of his time working on a great masterwork inspired by Nora, with one of the primary and most beloved characters in 20th century literature based on her. During this time, he published other works that he didn't actually have to pay himself to publish. Chamber Music was a book of poetry that he published in 1907. I say this, this is generally a critical consensus. As a young poet, James Joyce was not very good. So the poetry was not good. But as a novelist, he was brilliant. As a short story writer, he was brilliant. So Dubliners was his first great short story collection. And in 1916, he published his first great novel, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. And this is really where we first start to see his mature voice. In this case, some of the opening scenes are very famous. He also wrote a play, a little bit of a potboiler. The language in Exiles is a little bit richer than perhaps some of his other earlier pieces, but it's a little bit formulaic. Then in 1922, his masterwork, his first masterwork, comes into play, Ulysses by James Joyce. This image is from the original first edition published by Shakespeare and Company in Paris in 1922. Only 1,000 copies were published. Almost all of them were very rapidly destroyed as obscenity. And the last time, these don't change hands very often. The most recent item that I saw was $275,000 to buy one of those. Joyce couldn't make any money from that book because it was deemed filth, and so nobody would give him copyright. So to make money, he started working on small little pieces of his next work that he would leak out in literary reviews. So this one was one published by Ford Madox Ford called Work in Progress. And Joyce so loved that title that he adopted that for the next 19 years as the title of his work in progress. In 1927, he actually published an edition of only 10 books in New York to make sure that he could secure copyright of Work in Progress. In the years that followed, he put out 47 separate small pieces, many of which were done on private presses. This is a piece that was actually signed by Joyce, as you can see down at the bottom. Only 500 of these were put out. Habit Childers Everywhere, HCE is a meme that shows up regularly in Work in Progress. The main character's name was the initials HCE and Anne Olivia Plurabelle, ALP. So you see those over and over again. Shem and Sean were the children of HCE and ALP. And this is actually another standalone book that came later by Joyce that were fragments from Work in Progress. People began to get fascinated by his language during this time. There was actually a book published about Ulysses that listed every word that appeared in Ulysses and how many times it appeared and where it appeared. So I'm very fond of grown grouse gurgling. So his language began to interest people, the way he wrote and how he used words. Other writers, as they were going through these 47 iterations of work in progress, began to get excited about it and to kind of embrace the wordplay and the gamesmanship. People think of him as being very serious, but William Carlos Williams, Samuel Beckett, big writers did this book called Our Examination Round His Factification, making fun lovingly of his work. People oftentimes think that his work was not very deliberate, that he was just engaging in sort of random wordplay. This is actually a hand-edited manuscript of a galley proof of Tales Told of Shem and Shawn, where you can see that he was intentional. He was writing these weird words and using weird language intentionally. This is his daughter, Lucia. Nora was his muse for Ulysses. Throughout the time that he was writing work in progress, Lucia, who was she was a dancer, she dated Samuel Beckett, she began to have very severe mental health issues. Her mother didn't want to see Lucia institutionalized. Joyce knew she needed help. She was institutionalized. Her mother never saw her again. Joyce visited her often and actually, as a form of occupational therapy, asked her to design an alphabet. So she did an alphabet. This is Lucia's A that Joyce actually used in one of the later pieces of work in progress called Storiella as She Is Sung. His poetry, this is an edition of his collected poems, which included chamber music, which I talked about at the beginning. It's still not very good poetry, but it was a beautiful book. It was a limited edition book. This one's another one that's signed by Joyce that came out in the 1930s. And this is kind of how he paid his bills and how he kept things going through the 1920s and 1930s. So what is work in progress? Work in progress is Finnegan's Wake. So Joyce finally in 1939 takes all of these elements and brings them out to press. This is the first edition of Finnegan's Wake from 1939, the Faber and Faber limited edition, and it really became his crowning life achievement. So he finished this in 1939. He passed away in 1941. And so why did I choose? I'm the executive director of Salisbury House Foundation, if you don't know that, so this is where I work. Why did I choose to talk about this? Every object I showed you in that presentation is in Des Moines. Every object I showed you in that presentation is 3 rooms away from us right now. So these books exist as works of art physically here in Des Moines. Thank you.